Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello, everybody. It is Monday, November the 24th, 2025, Thanksgiving week in the United States. Some people wonder what there is to be thankful about in America in 2025. We're kind of talking about this today with my guest, Johan Norberg, one of Sweden's leading futuristic writers and historians. He was on the show back in 2021 talking about a book that he had out then. It was called Open, The Story of Human Progress. And we talked about what made conservatism and what engendered the idea of openness. Johan has a new book out. It's called Peak Human, What Makes a Civilization Last, very much along the theme of his other books. And he had an interesting piece recently in the Washington Post last month. Is it America's fate to decline and fall? Here's what history says. Johan is joining us from Malmö in Sweden. Johan, I'm not sure what history tells us, but if you can cast your mind back to 2021, when you were last on the show, are you more or less optimistic about American decline in the last 4 years?
It's been a long time since 2021, and so many things have happened. Not that many that have made me more optimistic and hopeful, I'd say. And I think that some of the conscious, systematic attempt from the White House to undermine both international relationships, the rules-based order and free trade, and certain domestic institutions when it comes to the rule of law, makes me think that we're in a difficult moment.
To put it politely, as the Scandinavians would say, a difficult moment. Americans might use different language. It's important to note, Johan, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not some radical leftist critic of Trump and MAGA. You're a conservative, but a globalist as well. What is it about MAGA and Trump that you believe suggests the decline or the acceleration of decline in the United States?
Well, you know what? I usually describe myself as a classical liberal in the European Enlightenment tradition from John Locke and Adam Smith and onwards. But obviously, we've had a conservative movement that has been trying to conserve what's good about Western civilization for a long time. And as some described it, actually one sort of center-right leader in Sweden once put it, I'm a conservative who wants to conserve what's best in our heritage, and what's best is classical liberalism. The ideas of rule of law, limited governments, individual rights, and so on. And MAGA doesn't fit into any of these traditions. It's a very difficult and a very radical ideology that seems to, it's made up of many different things, but one of them being this kind of urge to find a strong man with all the right solutions for all our problems. And he doesn't have time for the normal democratic process, the rule of law, independent courts, negotiations, compromise. All those things take time. And obviously that's why a lot of people feel like nothing happens, everything gets stuck in process. So we need something strong to just get things going. Unfortunately, someone who attempts to point us all in the right direction might once in a while point us all in the the wrong direction. And that's what history teaches us as well, that the most dangerous thing we can do is to replace this collective wisdom when we crowdsource ideas from millions and millions of people through markets, academic freedom, free speech, and so on. When we replace that with just sort of one populist leader, then things often starts to decline.
You use the phrase, Johan, what history teaches us, and I know you cover that in the new book, and you certainly focus on it in your Washington Post op-ed on America's fate to decline. What does history teach us? You talk about the Romans and the Greeks, medieval civilization. Is a reaction against openness a symptom or a cause of decline, or a consequence?
Well, it's both, I think. Sometimes you see this kind of set in, when civilizations decline, it's usually the horsemen of the apocalypse have already, geopolitical tensions, war, famine, plague, and so on. But that's not enough to ruin a civilization. For that to happen, the reaction to these problems and disasters have to go in the wrong direction. And that we have this reaction against the traditional engines of growth. And I can't put it better. The Greek historian who said that there was a mentality of trying to explore the world, something new and acquire something new, and it's a mentality where you feel and you try to stay home to protect what you've already. And broadly speaking, the Athenian mindset is conducive to creating dynamic civilizations. But crisis is quite often that people react in a more Spartan way, because if everything's scary, you don't want to go out and explore. You want to stay at home and build walls against the rest of the world. Unfortunately, that often turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, a self-fulfilling pessimism, because if everything's dangerous, you're not going to acquire the methods, the ideas, the technology, the wealth that you might need to deal with these problems.
Don't need me to tell you, Johan, as you sit in your hotel room in Malmo, that a few hundred miles east, there's a new battle perhaps between Sparta and Athens in the Ukraine. If America is in decline or potential decline, I'm guessing that your analysis of civilization reflects very poorly on Russia and Putin. Are they the classic case of all Sparta and no Athens?
I would say so. All Sparta and no Athens. That's very well put, because it's all about building barracks rather than creating innovation and wealth. And with a top-down emperor who builds his power on extracting resources and handing it to all his favorites, and then in a very aggressive posture against the rest of the world. Not really, I don't think, to acquire resources, because it's much more costly to acquire it through war and destruction than just buying them on the market, but more like he fears any kind of classical Slavic civilization that shows an alternative to the kind of despotism that he's built. And that's what Georgia was trying to do, which he invaded in 2008. That's what Ukraine has tried to do to, for all its faults, build a democratic or market-based one with free speech to the rest of the world. And that's a lethal threat to any tyrant to see that on his, because that might give people ideas. And Russia hasn't produced new ideas, new wealth. It's only relies on its mineral wealth and natural gas and oil controlled by the government. But a declining empire can be a very dangerous empire to the rest of the world, and it might even feel like it's their last chance to rearrange the world order. And today, Monday, it seems like with the new Trump-Russia peace plan, which is really just a way of surrendering completely to Russia, it seems like Putin has come better off than he should have.
How does your analysis, particularly of the importance of openness in terms of human progress, how does it work in terms of China, Johan, which perhaps is neither Sparta nor Athens? It's certainly not Athenian, but it's less Spartan than Russia. How do you analyze China, Xi's China, in terms of your arguments both in Open and in the new book, Peak Human?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think Russia is a case of split personality in a way, because China, after Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policy, you have it there in the very slogan, in 1978, without opening up for democracy and really decentralized institutions, at least learned the lesson that you have to cooperate with the rest of the world. You have to have your scientists cooperating with foreign scientists. You need foreign capital and markets and mix and blend and to come up with something better. And actually learn from many of the grassroots example of free markets that had place. Farmers secretly began and starting village enterprises. And as Deng Xiaoping purposed an old Chinese proverb, you cross the river by feeling the stones, rather than having this complete top-down Maoist or Xi Jinping method. Instead, you're trying to sort of feel the stones, what has already been tried and what has worked out here in these villages, and give people a bit more freedom to experiment with it. And that resulted in 30 years of amazing growth in China. And no, it wasn't Athenian, but at least it borrowed some aspects of Athens, I'd say. But then Xi Jinping is a different character, and he's more Spartan, more centralized. He has this overarching sense of order and control, which means that, Joel Moker, the economic historian who just got the Nobel Prize in economics, he points out that, yes, if the Emperor Xi then wants something to be done rapidly, sort of start lots and lots of electric vehicle factories, they are able to produce rapid progress over there. But at the same time, his limited pluralism, his limited openness in the rest of the economy. So it's reduced the ability to create strange new surprises and innovation in other areas. And at least Moker's conclusion, and I buy this, this will make it difficult for China in the long run to be very innovative, at least in the way that makes their workers more productive, more competitive at a longer term, because innovation takes a certain Athenian spirit.
In your piece on America, you suggest that it's hard to quantify, but empires turn in terms of confidence, and that and when they lose their confidence, then perhaps empires begin to decline. We know all about Trump. I don't want to make this another Trump conversation, but you keep on talking about Athens. Of course, the values of Athens were most captured by Pericles and his great speech. Why in the United States is there such a scarcity, shall we say, of Pericles? What is it that's happened over the last few decades, which has meant that Trump and his, I don't know, it's not Spartan, a kind of wannabe Spartan demagoguery is dominating the public space, and there are no Pericles. Where do we find the Pericles, Johan?
Yeah, well, few cultures find a Pericles, and they're quite.
But if we want to recapture the spirit of Athens, we need a Pericles.
Yes, I think we do, or at least politicians who restrain themselves to leave some room for more people to go about their own businesses and projects in a more pluralist way. But yes, you need to be a Pericles to instill some sort of a spirit of hope and of progress in a country. And unfortunately, they are rare in history. And I think that's partly because it is more difficult to do both of these things at the same time, to both create this sense that there's hope, there is movement, there's a trajectory, but at the same time also explain to people that it's not coming from me. I won't do this alone. It doesn't come from a top-down solution. It can only come if you create these things. I can give you the opportunities, the platform on which to create things. And unfortunately, it's so much easier for political leaders to just divide and conquer. And they relearn that lesson quite often, unfortunately, by looking at successful examples of that, telling people that, look, the other side, they want to destroy your lifestyle and everything that you are about, but I alone can protect you. And once that happens, both sides can play that game, and unfortunately that creates these descending spirals in a way. And I think that's something that's happened in US in recent decades.
Yeah, and in our last conversation, you talked about this degeneration into us and them. You end your post piece with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, who clearly was about as close to Pericles perhaps as one can get in the modern age. Were there 20th century versions of Pericles in American modern history? I mean, people think of JFK. We did a show last week with Chris Matthews, a very distinguished American television pundit, who's just written a book about Bobby Kennedy, suggesting that there was a Periclean quality to him. Who in modern American history might offer at least the potential of Pericles?
Well, it's easy to go all the way back to the founding fathers because they, of course, were inspired by Pericles and they studied ancient history a lot to try to learn from the lessons of ancient cultures, both Athens and Rome, and try to think about how can we create a democratic experiment or a Rome that doesn't, where we don't undermines all these institutions. And they were wise enough ideas of the Constitution, how we do create a division of powers, checks, and that we use the passions of different groups to sort of cancel each other out, which I think is still one of the most brilliant insights of statecraft ever. And that's quite Periclean. And compared to that, it's hard to come up with anyone in more recent times. But I would say that at least when it comes to the sort of the rhetorical project, I think both in different ways, JFK and Ronald Reagan, they both talked about in a positive way the American aspirations and the ideals of openness and of liberty, rather than trying to say that our project is to destroy certain disloyal groups within our own societies. And that's a kind of rhetoric that I think still is up for grabs, at least when people are fed up with this kind of cultural civil war that goes on in many Western countries today.
You write about intolerance and its problems in both the post piece and in the new book. Why has there been this degeneration towards intolerance, both on the left and the right in the United States and perhaps more broadly? Is it a form of insecurity, human unhappiness? What's the explanation? Is it economic, psychological, political?
I'd be hard-pressed. Of course, you can always look at certain material factors. I think that something like the great financial crisis of 2008 and the fact that we had a long period of lower growth rates and less income growth in both the US and in Europe afterwards, that kind of economic decline often results in more zero-sum thinking, because usually the economy is growing, and trade and innovation means that both different groups can prosper at the same time. But for quite some time that wasn't the case, and then people start to fight over the scraps, and then usually you turn towards sort of out groups and find scapegoats, and often you attack immigrants, because whatever they do, whether they live on welfare or they become Nobel laureates, they're always some kind of other, and they are a problem, unfortunately. So there are some material factors, but I also think because this is a broader phenomenon and it applies to lots of groups, I think there is something about our very diverse culture, because the past 30 years or so have seen an explosion of choice and opportunity, the opening up of communication and of entertainment and of media. Everything's accessible. Everyone can suddenly express themselves. It's a wonderful democratic triumph. But I think that a lot of people are worried and uncomfortable in that world. And especially when they see people are very unlike them in their behavior, their identity, in their beliefs, in their own social media feeds. And I think this, among a certain group, this has triggered a sort of tribal instinct whereby we have to fight against them. Just because we've seen this on the left, it's especially sort of the university campus left for a long time, shouting down other speakers and trying to get them off the campus because they wanted to be a safe space. And then the MAGA right took that and ran with it and tried to do the same things, but top down by attacking and scaring, threatening universities and media companies and explaining that criticism of Trump is probably illegal. I mean, it tells you that the instincts that the collectivist versions of the left and the right have of sort of unity, we have to believe in the same ideals, we have to be very much alike, it's a bad fit with modern choice and openness, because when they have that perspective, they are going to try to punch us into shape and punch other groups into silence. They have to come around quite quickly and realize that you can live and let live, because otherwise I think this is an existential threat to our ideals of openness.
Johan, you and I are talking from hotel rooms. You're in Malmo, I'm in Washington, D.C. We're part, for better or worse, of this new globalized elite. You and I do rather well out of it as writers, speakers, pundits, podcast hosts. But some people might be watching and thinking to themselves, well, it's fine for Johan Norberg and Andrew Keen. They're doing well out of this globalized system. But many people aren't, and they have every reason to react negatively against globalization. You've identified yourself as a classic liberal. But is there a need for government to recalibrate some of the more problematic consequences of globalization?
I hear you, and I understand why that's a popular trope, that some globalists enjoy that lifestyle and those communities. Not everyone does. I would slightly, though, before I go into sort of the material aspect of it, say that there's another aspect of this. You know, Marco Polo could benefit from China's ingenuity and inventions because he was a globalist. He traveled all the way from Italy to China. But most Europeans couldn't. So they couldn't benefit from, I don't know, the magnetic compass, toilet paper and paper money and other Chinese inventions. It was only when we got more globalization, trade and global communications, only then did most people start to benefit from the talent, the innovation of other people in other places. So I actually think that those who stay where they are, they benefit more from globalization in a way than the Marco Polos do. But that is not always the case if the factory where you've been employed all your life is going out of business because of foreign competition. And that will always be a problem in any kind of innovative society. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's good. If we can do new things in better ways, then we should stop doing old things in old ways. That's the old Schumpeterian idea of creative destruction, and it's the only way in which we will continue to make progress and increase real living standards for whole societies, for all groups and not just for the few. And that will happen whether it's from trade or technological change or just the change in consumer demand. So, and I think it's a good thing. I think we need more of it. There's a problem that we have a lack of productivity growth in our economies. But yes, there is a case that we're going to have to really help and compensate those who, when that happens. It's not through their own faults, partly because if we don't, we'll see these reactions. And there, I think there's been a lack of imagination from all sides politically in recent decades, because we usually just sort of pay people off with some benefits to stay home, stay unemployed. We have to think more constructively about helping people to retrain, to move to other places, to have wage insurance, and helping people to continue to move with the speed of the economy.
Your piece on America ultimately, at least in my interpretation, was optimistic about America. You're writing, of course, the year before America's 250th anniversary. Is it because government in America has been much more limited ultimately? Does that give you your confidence in the future of America?
I think so, yes. You know, Churchill's old saying, which I believe in, that America will always do the right thing after having exhausted all the other alternatives. Well, now America is in the face of trying everything else and exhausting those alternatives. Will this be is this an existential shock and a crisis? I think that the MAGA right wouldn't hesitate to ignore courts and the division of power completely, and Congress so far is really not even awake to what is going on in any way, and Republicans who don't agree, they're too terrified to speak out. However, again, we come back to the founding fathers and the Constitution, the fact that there are such strong limits to government and executive power and overreach. And I think we can see that even today, that the only ones who are really doing their work in the US right now are the courts. And that takes time, and it's a slow process. I guess it has to be a slow process, but it seems to be working. And one by one, the unconstitutional aspects of governance right now is being struck down. Again, I'm sure Trump couldn't care less. He'd be happy to say that this is undemocratic and that the whole Smithsonian project is wrong. But that's where I think, and this might be because I'm a diehard believer in sort of America constantly at least self-correcting. This is where where the Republican Party would not join him, because they know there is life after Trump. He's an old guy, he's on his last term, but they will be around for a long period of time, and they're going to have to think about their legacy and perhaps even of their principles. And after having talked about the importance of the Constitution for 2 centuries, they can't just throw it by the wayside.
You note that the only resistance, or maybe I'm misquoting you, but you seem to be saying that the only resistance to Trump and MAGA has come from the courts. But some people would disagree, Johan. There have been a lot of popular demonstrations, the No Kings demonstrations, which brought out hundreds of thousands of people. Alongside Pericles, of course, in terms of manifesting the Athenian ideal was Socrates and his idea of resistance and philosophy. Is there a Socratic element alongside that Periclean one to maintaining the Athenian ideal?
I think that's a great society built from the top. They are built through a long organic process of millions of people interacting, and it's often built from the bottom up through the Socrateses of the world, through social movements, and through civil society organizations. And obviously there has to be some sort of those ideals have to be kept alive by people, and you're absolutely right when it comes to that there's more pushback in those instances. That's the kind of the dialogue has to keep going there between the people and the elected and the courts in various ways. And so these Socrates and his idea that he was only wiser than others because he knew less, that's why he had to inquire and question and enter into dialogues and to hopefully make both sides wiser in the future. That's an incredibly important aspect of the democratic conversation, but of all forms of technological and economic progress as well. But mind you, the Athenian Democratic Assembly eventually sentenced Socrates to death. Even the Athenians killed their greatest philosopher. So it tells you something about how those forces aren't necessarily popular in every era.
And of course, Socrates' most famous student was Plato, who came up with his Republic, which rejected the openness of Periclean Athens and argued in favor of some sort of philosophical dictatorship, philosopher kings. So some people would suggest that elites rule better. Socrates certainly wouldn't have agreed with that. In America these days, Johan, a lot has been written about the rottenness of American elites. The metaphor, literally and otherwise, is that's being used is the role of Jeffrey Epstein. All his emails have come out and all his interactions with academic, intellectual, financial elites. What's the message in your argument, both in the new book and in the column, about elites? Do they have something to learn in terms of maintaining Western civilization and openness? They're not perfect either,
no,
are they?
Certainly not. And if they were, we could hand them total power. And obviously this is where all the Curtis Yarvinses of the world go wrong as well. Just by looking at elites who fail, he thinks that we need some new philosopher king or some sort of techno autocracy. But obviously, how do you make sure that you won't get Jeffrey Epstein on top of as the monarch in that?
Yeah, nobody wants Jeffrey Epstein on top of anything these days. Fortunately, he's no longer around to be on top, but he's a very dangerous character, I think, symbolically.
Quite right. And I mean, there's a lot of ruin in societies. Elites, economic, political elites will see corruption and abuse wherever there is power in the world. But that's the very reason why we need to expose elites to competition. That's why we need the relative openness, at least, of societies with checks and balances and divisions of power, because the only alternative is some sort of Plato republic or an Orbanist, Putinist, Erdogan style autocracy. And then you'll get more of that abuse and that corruption, because they only surround themselves with the yes men, and they don't.
Let me just jump in here, Johan. What about the Singapore model of rule by engineers? Yeah. Where there is perhaps less corruption than anywhere else in the world, for better or worse.
I'd be happy to concede that Singapore has built a quite successful and quite open society without being a democracy, and it's astonishing and it's impressive, and that's also the reason why we shouldn't use it as a model, because everywhere else where we've tried, we've failed. That's the reason why Singapore keeps coming back as the example. Most times when we try to find a Lee Kuan Yew to rule a society, we end up with a Mao Zedong or a Nicolas Maduro or an Erdogan kind of character. So Singapore was an exception, and it could be perhaps we got lucky. Perhaps there was something related to the existential threat to Singapore from all sides in a very chaotic area, so that Lee Kuan Yew and his clique realized that any mistake we do, it will be the end of this system. It's very difficult to replicate, and I wouldn't try.
Final question, Johan. You're talking to me from Malmo in southern Sweden. You don't have Thanksgiving in Europe, perhaps for good reason, because there's not that much to be thankful about these days. You're optimistic about the US. Sweden, of course, is slightly different from the rest of Europe, but it strikes me, in terms of your analysis, that Europe is neither Sparta nor Athens. Maybe you need a third model, some sort of bureaucratized model from antiquity. Maybe Europe is Rome without the military power. What's gone wrong in Europe, and what's your message in this new book, Peak Human, for Europe? Maybe there isn't a message.
That's a great question. Perhaps we need a third model. You're right about that. Some sort of, we got the Rome without the military power. Perhaps it's the China Mandarin bureaucratic class, but without China. But I think that the European Union is a wonderful idea. It combines the best of both worlds, because it's the idea of having this open continent where people, ideas, and capital can move across borders, and yet we experiment with different institutions and solutions in various places. So it could be like a better version of the sort of the Greek city-states who competed but mostly made war on each other, but a laboratory where we can experiment and learn from each other and trade freely. The problem is twofold. First of all, we haven't really built that open space, because we still don't have this openness of especially service markets and of a unified capital market, which means that we've got lots of great European startups. But unfortunately, I often meet them in California, because they often move there in search of capital and market.
It's good for us in California, less good for you in Europe.
The other problem is that we have this Mandarin class in Brussels and in many European capitals who see this institutional competition and all this diversity and think that they, with their exaggerated sense of order, they think they have to standardize it in every way and come up with one rule for every piece of data use and for every plastic bottle everywhere. And that's a problem, because it limits the eccentricities and the entrepreneurship that could take place within this open sphere. And both of these things are a problem, but what makes me a little bit hopeful is that this is something we can handle. There are things Europe can't choose, or it's not within our power. Russia will always be a neighbor of us. Those are the things that we can't do anything about, but we can do something about our economy and make sure that those startups don't leave for California.
Final, Johan. Peak Human sounds like the kind of title one might find in Silicon Valley. Is AI the great opportunity to restart the motor of innovation, or are you more fearful?
I think it's an amazing opportunity. When I look at technology history and cultural history, I can't help but see that it's geography and distance is the great enemy of civilization. Every great idea, every great innovation is this combination of different bits and pieces of knowledge and discoveries, and equipment in various places. We have to combine them in strange, unexpected ways. And obviously AI is going to help us to do that faster and better than at any point in human history. At the same time, unfortunately, bad people are going to use AI in the same way. So obviously, we have to be a little bit concerned about everything from crooks to despots and how they use it to take our money and take our liberties away. So it's a blessing, and AI is a blessing and a little bit of a curse.
Blessings and curses. Good advice for our Thanksgiving week. Johan Norberg's new book, Peak Human, is already out. Congratulations, Johan, on the new book, and keep defending freedom. We need guys like you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.